the life you might have lived. Years later, she would understand that there are silences which protect us, and silences which alter the course of a life. For more than 3 decades, Eleanor had believed she had survived a disappointment. It was only in the last hour of an ordinary Thursday evening, with rain moving softly against the windows and a sealed envelope resting between them, that she understood the truth. She had not survived disappointment at all. She had survived a misunderstanding. And there is something uniquely merciless in learning too late that the great sorrow of your life was never fate, never rejection, never necessity. Only 2 people standing on opposite sides of the same moment, each mistaking the other's silence for farewell. Some revelations arrive like thunder. The worst ones arrive quietly. They sit down across from you, say your name exactly as they once did, and hand you the life you might have lived. Chapter 1. The sound of her name. There was something unbearable in the way he said her name. Not loudly, not even with surprise. Just the small, careful sound of it crossing the table between them, as if he were testing whether it still belonged in his mouth after all this time. She felt it settle into the silence around them, precise as a blade, and knew at once that dinner had been a mistake, that she had mistaken distance for safety and memory for something gentler than it was. Eleanor. He had always said it that way, as though each syllable required consideration, as though names were not to be used carelessly. The waiter arrived then, placing a basket of bread between them with the professional indifference of a man who had long ago learned to move through private disasters without disturbing them. Eleanor offered a brief nod of thanks. Across from her, Adrian reached for his water glass. His hand was steady. That unsettled her more than if it had trembled. She had imagined this meeting many times in the week since his letter arrived. In some versions he appeared diminished by age, softened by regret, rendered harmless by time. In others he was visibly uncertain, carrying the awkwardness of someone forced to account for himself after decades of silence. Instead, he looked almost exactly as she remembered. Older, of course. The hair at his temples had gone fully silver. There were fine lines at the corners of his eyes. His shoulders had acquired the slight stoop of a man who had spent too many years bent over books and desks and private thought. But the essential fact of him remained untouched. The same reserve, the same grave attentiveness, the same infuriating composure. She folded her napkin carefully across her lap. "You shouldn't have written." He regarded her for a moment before answering. "I suspected you might say that." "Then why did you?" He glanced toward the window, where rain traced pale vertical lines against the dark glass. "Because after 32 years, he said, silence begins to feel less like dignity and more like cowardice." The words landed between them. Not accusation, not apology. Something more difficult. Truth, perhaps. Eleanor looked down at the menu, though she had no intention of reading it. The print blurred slightly. Outside, the city glistened under rain. Street lamps cast wavering gold across the pavement. Beyond the restaurant windows, umbrellas drifted past like dark flowers opening and closing in the wind. Inside, everything was low light and polished wood and muted conversation. A place chosen, she suspected, for its discretion. Adrian had always understood the uses of atmosphere. "You presume a great deal," she said. "Do I?" "Yes." He gave the faintest inclination of his head. "That has also remained unchanged." Against her will, she almost smiled. Almost. The waiter returned to take their order. Eleanor chose the sea base because it required no thought. Adrian ordered lamb. Neither touched the wine list. When they were alone again, silence settled over the table. Not empty silence. Dense silence. The kind that gathers when 2 people are listening for what has not yet been said. Finally, Adrian leaned back. "How is Thomas?" The question was simple. Its effect was not. Eleanor felt herself stiffen. "He's well. I'm glad. He retired last spring." "Still painting?" "Yes." Adrian nodded as though this pleased him. He had met Thomas only twice. Once at a faculty reception in Oxford, when Eleanor was 34 and newly married. And once, years later, at a gallery opening in London, where Thomas had shaken his hand warmly, unaware of the history standing beside his wife. Thomas had always moved through the world with that kind of ease. He trusted generously. It was one of the things she had loved most about him, and one of the things that had made her feel, at times, quietly fraudulent. "And your daughter?" Adrian asked. "Claire is in Boston now." "The hospital?" "She became chief of surgery in January." A genuine smile touched his face then. "She must be formidable." "She is. Like her mother." The compliment was so gently offered that she could not reject it. "She's more direct than I ever was." "That may be wisdom." Eleanor studied him. "You've done this deliberately." "What?" "This civility." A flicker of surprise crossed his expression. "Would you prefer hostility?" "No." "Then I'm not sure what offense I've committed." "You're behaving as though this is ordinary." His gaze held hers. "No, Eleanor." His voice was very quiet. "I'm behaving as though if I allow myself to acknowledge what this is, I may not remain here." Something shifted then. A hairline fracture in the careful surface of the evening. She looked away first. The bread remained untouched between them. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday. Cream paper. Her name written in the hand she recognized instantly despite the decades. For several moments she had simply stood in the hall staring at it, one hand still resting on the day's post, the house around her steeped in afternoon quiet. Thomas had been upstairs in his studio. The radio was playing faintly somewhere. Rain tapped against the conservatory glass. Nothing in the world had changed. And yet the sight of that handwriting had altered the atmosphere of the house as decisively as if a window had been broken. She had carried the letter into the kitchen before opening it. She remembered absurdly noticing that the kettle needed descaling, that there was a chip in the blue enamel sugar bowl, that ordinary objects persisted in being ordinary even as memory rose up with devastating force. The letter itself was brief. "Eleanor, if this reaches you, and if receiving it does not offend your peace, I would ask for 1 hour of your time. There is something I must tell you before silence becomes impossible to defend. If you are willing, I will be at Bellamy's next Thursday at 7. If you do not come, I will understand. Adrian." No explanation, no elaboration, no clue as to what remained to be said after all these years. She had read it 4 times, then folded it neatly and placed it back inside its envelope. That evening she cooked sea bass with fennel and lemon. Thomas opened a bottle of white wine. They ate while discussing Claire's upcoming visit and whether the garden wall needed repairing before winter. At one point he reached across the table to brush her wrist lightly with his fingertips. A thoughtless, familiar gesture. It filled her with sudden, piercing guilt. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because some part of her had already accepted the invitation. Why now? The question escaped before she had fully decided to ask it. Their plates had arrived and sat largely untouched between them. Adrian set down his knife and fork. "Because I'm leaving." Her breath caught. "For where?" "Toronto." She frowned. "Canada?" A shadow of amusement crossed his face. "There are, as far as I know, no other Torontos of significance." "Why?" "My sister died in February." The words stilled her. "I didn't know." "No reason you should." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He took a sip of water. "She left me her house. I've accepted a visiting position at the university there." "For how long?" "Indefinitely." Eleanor considered this. "You could have written to tell me that." "I could have." "Instead, you asked me here." "Yes." "Why?" His expression changed then. Not visibly, perhaps, but something in him tightened, the old restraint drawing inward. There are things one should not say in letters. A pulse began to beat steadily at the base of her throat. She placed her fork down. "Then perhaps you shouldn't say them at all." He met her eyes. "Perhaps." Neither moved. At the next table, someone laughed softly. A glass clinked. The ordinary life of the restaurant continued around them, indifferent to the fault line opening quietly at its center. At last Adrian said, "Do you remember Florence?" The question struck with such force that for a moment she could not answer. "Florence. Spring of 1994. A conference on Renaissance manuscripts. Narrow streets washed in evening gold. The pensione near the Arno. The small terrace where they had stood after midnight while the city breathed below them. And the almost kiss that had changed everything. Yes, she said. His gaze did not leave her face. There is something about that night you never knew. A chill moved through her. What are you talking about? He hesitated. For the first time all evening, uncertainty entered his voice. After you left the terrace, I was approached by someone from King's. She frowned. What does that have to do with anything? They offered me the position. The memory returned at once. The lectureship at Cambridge he had abruptly declined. The decision that had baffled colleagues and altered the course of his career. You turned it down. Yes. Why? He was silent long enough that she felt the answer gathering before he spoke. Then he said very carefully, because I had intended to ask you to leave with me. The world seemed to tilt. The sounds of the restaurant receded. Eleanor stared at him, unable to speak. Adrian's face remained composed, but his hands had tightened around the stem of his glass. When you left that terrace, he continued, I believed your silence was your answer. I declined the offer the next morning. Her voice, when it came, was almost inaudible. I never knew. No. Why didn't you tell me? Because 2 weeks later I learned you were engaged. The breath left her. Thomas had proposed in June. Florence had been in April. On the terrace that night, she had waited for Adrian to say something, anything, that might justify the dangerous hope she had spent months trying to suppress. When he had said nothing, she had accepted Thomas's proposal, believing the other possibility had never existed. Across the table, Adrian watched understanding move through her like grief. I thought, he said quietly, that silence was the kinder choice. Eleanor's hands lay motionless in her lap. All at once she understood the strange shape of the life that had followed. The subtle ache she had never fully named. The question she had never permitted herself to articulate. Not what if he had loved me, but what if he had spoken? She looked up. Rain streamed against the windows. The city beyond had dissolved into trembling light. Why tell me now? His answer came without hesitation. Because I could not leave another continent between us carrying a lie built from omission. She stared at him, and for the first time in 32 years, the life she had believed settled and fully known seemed to open beneath her into terrifying possibility. Then Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a second envelope on the table between them. There's more, he said. Her eyes dropped to it. It was sealed. Her name written across the front in that same measured hand. What is it? His expression held something she could not read. Something I should have given you in Florence. The envelope lay between them like an accusation, or an invitation, and after a long moment, Eleanor reached for it.